So, before I go through the actual headings themselves, by the way, anyone who's got the agenda, there's the list of headings on there, on the other page. But yeah, before we get onto that, I just thought we'd go through how we came up with these headings and formed this kind of structure. So, as we've mentioned already, we carried out a survey via these cards. We've taken them to events, we've given them directly to people.
Yeah, read in the newsletter and various events.
Yeah, so we've consulted with a good number of people in a few different ways. By no means the whole area, but we're just trying to get a feel at this point for what people care about, what people instantly say that they think they like or dislike, or that needs to be improved about the area. And then what we've also done is had a look through, and we've got that document again.
Yeah.
So we've had a look at what the headings were in this document, the previous one, so that we can kind of get an idea of how they structured their plan document, and take an inspiration from that. Because it's for the same area, there's quite a lot that we can just kind of draw on from this, and I'd really encourage anyone to have a look at this. There's a link to it on our website. We've been trying to get hold of more physical copies, but they seem quite hard to come by. But we are, yeah, I would really say that if that's the way that you're going to engage with what type of thing it is we're trying to do, because this is basically the type of thing that we're trying to achieve. So we looked at what was that. We also were given some advice by locality. They kind of produced a template plan for us, which we drew some of the ideas from the headings that he gave us in that plan. But obviously that isn't local specific, and so there's lots of things which aren't really relevant. So we kind of took that with a pinch of salt, but it has influenced what we've come up with here. Yes, so we matched those up and came up with what we're presenting today. And then also, how we're going to use these headings. So this is basically trying to form a structure that our plan is going to have, so that we can start kind of really digging into what it is that we want to change, what it is that we want in our plan. So the first thing that we're going to do, so yeah, under each heading, we want to collate all the documents and evidence that are relevant to that. So that's going to be slightly different for each heading. There's going to be a lot of crossover. For example, that document is going to feed into all of the headings, but things like conservation area appraisals and historic stuff will only really feed into the historic environment kind of section of the plan. We want to hold workshops where members and other stakeholders can really get together and look at the things that they want to do, the things they want to change, that are relevant to that particular heading. And then based on the outcome of that, we want to write policies. We may well get a professional to help us with that bit, and so they can make sure it's all in the right language and that we've got all the right evidence that backs it up. But yeah, that's the bit that's probably going to take place outside of these meetings, but will be based on all that evidence from the workshops and documents that we've been looking at. So here are the headings that we've come up with. So we've got the introduction and context, and that's, well, I'll go through these on the next slides actually. But these are the headline areas. So there's only 5 of them, and that's, yeah. Underneath each one, there will be quite a lot of content. So it's not kind of dividing up into hundreds of areas. It's just the kind of broad brush. What are the topics that we want to look at? So the introduction context doesn't have any policies in it per se, because it's just about the facts, basically, what the area is, what we've already got here, what the kind of history of this area is. I don't really mean that in terms of like going right from this area has a lot of history. It's not. We're not going to like spell out the entire history of it, but just what might be relevant to a neighbourhood plan for this area. Things like when the last plan was produced and what that said. It will have a bit of that kind of context so that we know what we're working with here. And then the sustainable development strategy is really the broad brush about what we want to see is basically the broad vision of what we want to see. That probably also won't have any specific policies, but it will say the kind of direction that we want to go in, what our overall vision is. And here, from our research, we found that people like the fact that this area is close to the centre. It's where people can live who aren't at or above the national average income. Some people said that there's a growing feeling of community, and they like the sense of community and friendliness. People didn't like the idea of over-gentrification in this area, so that's something which we need to be careful of. And there are people who said there are too many cars, and there's people who complain about the flyover. There are quite a lot of different things, but all these things will feed in to what we want to do. So things people want to see improved. Someone said they want a more sustained plan for this area. That's exactly what we're doing here. And proper sustainable development of Anglia Square with green spaces, community gardens, fewer homes than currently suggested. Obviously, Anglia Square is a big issue for many people, and even if we're not commenting on Anglia Square directly, how it interacts with the rest of the area is very much relevant. So this section sets out the overarching principles which guide our neighbourhood planning, and so it might include the needs and visions of local people, the acknowledgement of the diverse communities and existing character, sustainability and durability, designing buildings for the long term, and think how things might change, including climate change, where we need to think about mitigation, adaptation, and resilience of the building to extreme weather events and things like that. Yes, we need to recognise that this is a significant district centre serving, as we've got there, predominantly lower income hinterland and Norwich. So when it comes to living and working, we had, here are some comments about what people said they liked about this area. They said that there's a mixture of housing, shops, businesses. It's mixed use. Some people said that they like the community, independent shops, unique restaurants and public houses. But some of the things that people said that they didn't like were long derelict building sites. And again, that's what we're here with, is say what should happen on those sites. But they also said that housing developments are putting pressure on already stretched medical practices and other services as well. So this is where we need to think about what we might want to say, what we might want to allocate in terms of other services to go alongside any new housing. So people have said that they'd like to change. It would be lovely to have more people living around here, more social housing, and they said that they'd like the empty sites and undeveloped areas to be developed. These are just samples of what people have said. There's quite a lot of different views, and they aren't always consistent. So that's why we've got this section, which is about living and working, is essentially what goes where within this neighbourhood area, what buildings we want in terms of residential development, what employment uses we want to try and encourage encourage within this area, whether there are any sites which we want to allocate to commercial use or to community use, which can include the use of SIL, which is the Community Infrastructure Levy. It's a kind of levy put on housing development in particular that helps pay for community things. And as a neighbourhood forum, we would get a say in how some of that is spent for our area. So we can say that there are community services we want within this section of the plan.
Green spaces or whatever.
Yeah. So the next thing that people said was that they liked the variety of architectural styles, mix of medieval, Georgian, industrial buildings, and that they liked the history and the architecture of the buildings. That was a definite positive that people identified in this area. And again, what people didn't like was the derelict sites, undeveloped lands, things which have been left to go wild. But on the flip side of that, they also said that they don't like the prospect of masses of new houses and apartments. There was quite a few people saying they didn't like the very tall development of Anglia Square and other things like that. And people said that they under what they would like to change, they said that it's the character of the area which needs to be maintained, and that regeneration is badly needed. So that's why we've got this category for regeneration and identity. And this section is about what we feel is important about the identity of the area, which includes the history and design. What's the feeling of the area currently is that we want to maintain, and which bits of it that we don't like and want to change. So this will include design, heritage and historic character, key landmarks and views, building massing and form, so things like height and form, and also retrofitting and enhancement of existing properties. I know that's an unfamiliar word to some people, so retrofitting is basically anything which improves an existing house. So that can include just changing the windows and doors, but it could also include adding lots of insulation, adding solar panels, anything like that. So that's that section. Then other comments that we got related to public realm and open space. So local parks were something that really people liked, the river walks, the churches, going for walks and seeing wildlife. A lot about wildlife in the comments that we got about what people liked. Trees, bird life, otters in the river, etc. And some people said they needed more of that. So lack of open space, need more green areas. And then also on the quality of cleanliness of that space, so litter, graffiti, and antisocial behaviour in some of the spaces. So quite a few people said that the things that they wanted to change on this related to the Riverside Walk. They wanted it to be continuous, have better lighting, but also in general better maintenance of the public spaces and facilities, more bins, more seating, things like that. So we think we need a section within our neighbourhood plan about public realm and open spaces, and it will include things like the key public spaces. So there are obviously some spaces which are particularly significant within the area, like Gildencroft, like St George's Green, that we will have specific policies about. And then green spaces in general and trees, river access, including the Riverside Walk, and lighting and safety. So that safety thing was another thing that people commented on quite a bit, and And so it's not just about lighting, but also whether there's other things that we can do through the design of buildings that makes people feel safer and secure. And then the last section that we thought we needed was infrastructure and access. This is because a lot of people said things like, so they liked the close proximity to the city centre, the fact that you can walk everywhere and you're not reliant on a car. And others said that we're out of the city, but close enough to get into the city when you need to. It's kind of debatable, I think, whether we're outside of the city, but I think obviously that's the way people see this. It's not the city centre. It's its own place outside of the city centre, and therefore has its own character, but is close to the city centre. People said that they didn't like traffic pollution, especially on St. Augustine Street. Increased volume of traffic, speeding, traffic held nowhere to cross roads. That was definitely a thing that came up in relation to the ring road. So people wanted to improve things by moving the transport, redirecting the traffic, creating safer pedestrian and cycle routes, changing smelly buses for electric buses was one of the suggestions, and people also said there was poor parking for regular visitors to the area, so that would be something we could look at as well. So this section is essentially about how we plan to for people to move within the area, people and goods as well, obviously. So it might include how we deal with pedestrian movement, how we deal with cycle movement, public transport movement, and private motor vehicles, including electric vehicles. We may have a particular policy on that. And also commercial vehicles and service access, where they can often have a different policy to the other vehicles. And disabled access, including the visually impaired. That's especially important here because we have a blind institute and housing.
Housing for blind people in the sector.
Yeah, housing for visually impaired on Magpie Road, and so we've got quite a few visually impaired residents. It's important to note that that transport planning is actually a different thing to this type of planning. That transport planning is dealt with by the county council, whereas planning generally is under the responsibility of the city council, and therefore the amount we can influence this is limited. We can't say we're going to change roads around. It's not within our power. We can obviously lobby for that from the county council. But this is really about what infrastructure we might want that supports those things. So we can definitely say things like where there should be bus stops, or where there should be allowed to be bus stops, or where there should be allowed to be parking spaces and other types of infrastructure that relate to access. So that's what we've come up with overall. And at this point, are there any questions on that? Do they all make sense? I can switch back to anything if you want me to have a look.